Good morning, everyone. Late morning. Everyone have a good coffee break? Feeling good? All right. So, I am Matt Forrest. I am our Director of Business Architecture at CARTO. I've been with CARTO for almost 3 years now. And I was actually a CARTO partner before I joined the company. So I've been working with CARTO since it was CARTO-DB and way back in the day. And I've been working in geospatial for close to 8 years, and I graduated from the University of Wisconsin with a degree in geography and sociology. So I'm originally from Minnesota. Anyone from Minnesota here? Midwesterners anywhere? There we go. Awesome. And the first thing you usually get asked when someone hears you're from Minnesota is, how do you deal with winters like this? There we go. Like that one. And you very carefully is usually the answer, with snow tires and a lot of mittens and warm clothes. But the second question you get asked is, have you been to the Mall of America? And for most people from the Twin Cities, the answer is yes, you've been there. And I was actually at the grand opening of the Mall of America in 1992. There was a large parade. And for a 5-year-old, the best thing was they gave out free stuffed animals. So it was a grand opening, very big thing. And the mall itself followed the same kind of footprint as many other sort of malls around the United States. You had your central court, you had your mostly retail shops and national brands you'd see around the nation, and then your corner anchor stores. And that was pretty much the model you would see at any major mall in any American city. But something started to change. In 2012, Bloomingdale's, which had been an anchor store in the mall since its opening, actually left. And this is a pretty big thing for an anchor store to actually leave a mall and totally just go away. Shortly thereafter, they were replaced by LL Bean, which only took over 15% of the original retail space of that area. In the upper corner, you can see Sears, which, as we all know, has had some troubles in the past. It's still in operation, but there's been many rumors of it actually closing down, which would mean a second anchor store at one of the nation's largest malls actually closing. And around the same time, there's this neighborhood called the North Loop. And when I was growing up, it was primarily industrial and warehouses, but over the years, it started to change. People started moving in, apartments started going up, small retail and boutiques started moving in. This kind of sounds like something that has happened in many cities around the nation and around the globe. And now it's one of the most sought after retail spaces in Minneapolis. But fortunately enough, the Mall of America was able to adapt, was able to sort of change and kind of keep up with the times. It's brought in smaller retail, sort of boutique brands, and then actually started a pop-up concept with retail moving in and out, short-term leases and things like that. So fortunately, as things started to move out, they were able to quickly adapt and turn that around. But that story about the Mall of America kind of represents something that's happened with many malls and many sort of retail and commercial planning around the nation. Many of those malls did not do so well, and things started to close as retail started to change and commercial preferences started to change as well. We saw this in a number of different places, but this article from the New York Times kind of exemplifies it. There's a new retail movement, there's a new commercial planning movement that's coming along with that, and malls in this sort of old model is just changing. And as I'm sure you're all aware, the way people buy products, the way they interact with brands, the way they move and actually go about their daily lives has just totally changed. Everyone knows this, everyone in this room is well aware of that. But that's been in commercial planning, as I mentioned, retail. It's been consumer packaged goods, electronics, automotive. Things are just sort of changing, and we're all sort of aware of this monumental shift. And it's continuing to this day. I think Whole Foods and Amazon's acquisition of Whole Foods has really changed and sort of shown how this model can be applied. And I think one thing for us in the room to kind of be aware of is location intelligence has gone through a very similar transformation. There's new data streams coming in. The way we interact with sort of traditional location intelligence or GIS may not be the best model to work with those, and we've had to find ways to adapt and move as with the industry. So when we think about sort of the traditional location intelligence or GIS, insights might be locked away. You might have to work very hard to find that data, pull it into a map, run some analysis, visualize it, and provide those insights. And that might be locked away with sort of geospatial experts. And many times, if you're going through this process, creating these insights, it may open up more questions than answers, and you'd have to go back and revise your work and create a new map and send it back. It was a pretty burdensome process. And really the key is that those insights were really locked away and difficult to answer. And if you weren't in one of those geospatial teams, it was hard to understand that and get that insight. And I think something that's really important is the next 5 million location intelligence users will not really know what GIS is. Just as the way in retail and commercial planning, consumers have changed preferences, the way they want to interact with brands have changed, the way that business users want to interact with location insights is also really changing. And I think all that said, both of these industries have gone through monumental shifts, and they're really positioned well to work together and find new ways to tackle this changing landscape, both in retail and commercial planning and in location intelligence. So the question sort of becomes, how do we work together and how do we do that effectively? So on one side, retail needs to find new ways to reach and serve consumers and find new ways to utilize the data that they're generating. There's new models, consumers are demanding new ways to interact with brands, and that has major implications for how commercial planning and logistics are set up to serve those consumers. On the other side, for location intelligence, there's new streams of location data. And I think the biggest and most important thing that I've seen in talking with many of you here this week and many of the folks that we work with at CARTO is that the most important thing is creating repeatable and actionable insights and putting those insights in the hands of the business users that are making these decisions. It can't be locked away. It can't be stored somewhere else. It can't be just within a specific team. We need to put that in the hands of people that are making these decisions. So as I'm sure you've heard throughout our event here, location-first companies are really taking a dominant market position. Those that are leveraging their location data and creating meaningful insights out of it are growing their business and creating really new ways of working with different companies. And this is happening in many different industries. But the more you use that location data, the more insights you're finding and the better sort of business you can build. But many businesses aren't doing this. I mean, only 10% of some location data is really being used to make these decisions. And that's really important to note. I think it's a statistic that we point out a lot in a lot of our conversations with our customers and people we work with, is that it's a small amount of data that's really being used today. The more we can grow that, the more we can learn and the better decisions we can make. Additionally, we've talked a lot about data at this conference, and I think there's really interesting things that are coming out of this. If you're thinking about a retail or commercial business, you have a lot of data there, but what else can you bring into these models to do that? Things like retail location insights with our MasterCard keynote yesterday. Actually seeing where people are spending money is incredibly impactful for commercial planning and retail space. Other things like weather, that can tell you how people are interacting with specific commercial and retail locations. And things like traffic and mobility data also make a huge impact here. So how can we use all this data that tell us more than demographics, more than just where people live, but actually how they're moving around and how they interact with things that we've built? And on top of that, new analysis and understanding and creating new creative ways to understand things like our trade areas. This is a really good example here of traditional trade area analysis saying, we know our traditional sort of census boundaries, we know where our customers are because, well, we have a zip code for them. That's really easy to pull in and understand. But when we actually use other location data, that's something that can tell us a little bit more beyond that. We actually see there's, if you look here at this sort of dark boundary around this IKEA, there's actually some cannibalization going on from other territories. So when you dive deeper and use some of this other analysis, it can tell you a lot more about your business and what's really going on. I think the key shift that I see is for retail and commercial planning, these the model of having the largest footprint is not going to win anymore. Having these large distributed networks that you have to serve with retail scattered across the country and a large logistics and distribution network are going to be incredibly challenging going forward. The same way that in location intelligence, we have to distribute our knowledge, get it in the hands of the people that need it, and give them the insights to do that. So what we can do in this new space is sort of a couple of different things. We can utilize new insights in retail and commercial planning and join these innovations together to create new approaches to solve these problems creatively. For retail or in commercial, I think there's a really important understanding of how, in the last slide, we have these really large distribution networks. How can we use existing infrastructure without recreating what we're doing to serve our consumers better? An example of that would be repurposing retail locations to serve a localized distribution network, cutting your delivery time down to maybe a few hours. You have existing retail locations, you have existing stock and product there. How could I use that to do that? And I think location intelligence provides us a really unique way to say, how do we reorganize and rethink what we're doing in retail and commercial? So first, I would say there's new data. Like I said, we've talked a lot about data, and it's really important to do that. One, and I mentioned this earlier sort of with the Mall of America, pop-up shops and this sort of new model of bringing your product directly to customers where they are and where they're going to be. How can we do that, and how can we put those shops and locate them effectively? Site selection is one component of all of this, but I think using something like retail insights data, we can actually see where people are spending money, where they're going to be, and how we can place these pop-up shops effectively in those locations. It's a strategy that's worked well for a lot of businesses, and I think it's one that is really important. And using this new data to find those locations can be a really effective strategy. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of these new models, pop-up shops being one of them, but in PricewaterhouseCoopers 2017 industry trends, they actually mentioned the Showroom Strategy. So these are retail locations that keep a very low inventory and overhead, just enough for you to go in, try on maybe clothing or see what's there, and then you're actually taking your order online and sending that. So when you think about that transaction, we can actually see you're placing a physical order and you're actually capturing information about that customer, specifically where they live, what products they've spent, and how much they spend. And when we know that data, we can start to create a really deep understanding of our consumer network, see where they live, and actually start to understand things about how people buy and where they live and how that impacts their buying decisions. We can use location intelligence to build this out on a large nationwide scale and really understand how we can use showroom concepts and this sort of new way of approaching retail and consumers, use that location data to inform how we do that going forward. And finally, there's the new analysis. And this sort of brings it all together. You can find new locations, you can understand where these new concepts can create a major impact, and then you can also identify clusters of consumers and understand how they spatially are purchasing your products and interacting with your brand. Now, we mentioned yesterday sort of understanding not just where people live, but you could actually think of using that data I mentioned before to create sort of a census of your consumers. So imagine looking at a data layer, not just of demographics like income, age, gender, but actually understanding this sort of area likes to buy maybe floral print shirts or suits. You can really understand a census of products that people are purchasing, buying, and actually use that to inform decisions like marketing, site list selection, and actually these distribution networks. So one company that has done this really well is Bonobos, and they're a great customer that we get to work with. They're a leading men's retailer, and they kind of pioneered this guide shop concept. So when you work or you go into a Bonobos store, you actually go in, and there'll be a person that will work with you to look through your sizes and help you decide what to buy, understand your preferences, and they'll actually work with you to say, here's what we think you should buy. And once you do that, you don't actually walk out of the store with clothes, which I think is part of the most interesting concept of the guide shop. So they have this limited inventory, just enough for you to try on, just enough to see if you like the clothes. But when they're actually purchasing, they hand you an iPad, you enter your information, and they ship the clothing to you. And I think they originally were just e-commerce, but I think this quote kind of sums it up nicely, is that we said we would never be offline, and then wait a second, we hit a big turning point and realized offline really works. And they started building this guide shop concept around the nation. They started to expand their retail footprint, and they're using location intelligence to decide how they do that effectively and where to place those locations. In fact, Bonobos opened a store in Minneapolis in 2016, in all places the North Loop that I mentioned earlier. So all of that summed up, I think there's a really unique position for retail and commercial planning to use all this data to do a couple of different things. First is sort of understanding where you should be. There's new models, pop-up shops, guide shops, these different showroom concepts, and understanding where consumers are and where you should be. And also you can shorten the gap between a decision to purchase and actually having a product in hand. Using traditional retail models, that can be difficult. I might have to get up off of my couch, I might have to drive to a store, I actually have to be somewhere, but I can actually use a distributed retail local network with shops that I have existing to distribute and bring those products to customers within hours of them deciding that I'm interested in purchasing a product. And then finally, using all of this data that you're collecting to further understand how your consumers interact with your brand, how they interact with your company, and actually understand where they are in the context of your products, I think is a really unique spot that was really opened wide for location intelligence. So together, commercial planning, retail, and location intelligence have a unique position. We're both going through monumental changes, but we can work together to approach these new concepts, find the best ways to work together, and actually interact with consumers at the end of the day. So with that, thank you, and I can answer any questions.